Imagine, just for a moment, that you're tasked with designing a civilization totally from scratch.
Oh, that's a big task.
Right, it's huge. You're sitting at this massive drafting table, and you've basically got two main blueprints right in front of you.
Blueprint A and Blueprint B.
Exactly. Blueprint A is pure, unadulterated capitalism. It's dynamic, it's fast, it generates these massive skylines, but, well, it has this really nasty habit of turning into a profit at all costs machine.
Right, where human beings can very easily become just disposable cogs in the wheel.
Right. The classic greed is good model. It builds wealth, sure, but it severely concentrates it.
And then you look at Blueprint B, which is communism, or strict state socialism. On paper, it looks incredibly fair. Ideally, everyone is equal.
Yeah.
But in practice, the sources we're digging into today argue that it completely strips away the human motivation to work.
Because if I get paid the exact same, whether I bust my back for 12 hours or just sit there doing the bare minimum, why sweat?
Exactly. Why bother? So you're stuck.
You're completely trapped. You have a system that runs on greed on one side and a system that runs on total apathy on the other.
It's the classic binary trap. And usually, when we talk about global economics or political theory, we just assume those are the only two choices on the menu.
Pick your poison, basically.
Right. You either accept gross inequality for the sake of economic growth, or you accept stagnation for the sake of equality.
But what if there is a blueprint C?
A third option.
Yeah, a third option. That is exactly what we are unpacking in today's deep dive. We've got this stack of documents here that are, honestly, they're fascinating because they do not come from the usual Wall Street think tanks or Ivy League economic departments.
Far from it.
They come from a really detailed analysis of what's called divine jurisprudence. Specifically, we are looking at a framework derived from the Quran, mostly focusing on Surah al-Baqarah and the extensive commentaries written by Allama Ghulam Ahmad Parvez.
And I want to jump in and be really clear right off the top here, because I know exactly how this sounds to a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely.
Sticking with the mission of our deep dives, we are not looking at this as a theology sermon.
We aren't here to preach faith to you.
Not at all.
Right.
We're looking at this as a hard, objective, socio-legal system. The sources actually present this as a constitution for a society that is actively trying to solve that exact tension you just mentioned.
How to prevent capitalist exploitation without killing individual human drive.
Right. It's an incredibly delicate balance.
And the deeper we got into these notes, the more I realized this is not just vague spiritual advice. Be nice to your neighbor. It gets incredibly bureaucratic.
Oh, it gets right down into the weeds of contract law.
It's less about feeling good and way more about doing justice.
Definitely.
We're going to talk about a radical redefinition of interest, or riba, that goes way beyond just saying, don't charge 5%.
It's a fundamental shift in how labor is viewed.
And we're going to look at ancient debt laws that sound like they were drafted for a modern Whistleblower Protection Act.
Which is wild when you consider the historical context.
And this was the massive curveball for me when I was reading the source material. We're going to see how this text, which so many people just assume is inherently patriarchal, actually argues for the absolute equality of women.
To the point of affirming their right to be the head of state.
Head of state. So our mission today is to explore that entire framework objectively. We want to see how these texts view wealth, how they view justice, and perhaps most importantly, how they view the sheer potential of the human being.
Let's start with the money. The core economic engine of Blueprint C. The sources call it
The joint venture.
This is the foundational premise. If you don't grasp this, the rest of the system basically makes no sense. In the modern world, especially in the West, if you start a business, you think of it as entirely your business.
You're the solo founder. You're the CEO.
Right. I built this. It's my name on the building.
The self-made myth.
Exactly. The sources argue that this is a factual error. They frame every single human economic endeavor, whether you're farming a wheat field or building a tech startup in Silicon Valley, as a
Partnership
between the human being and the divine.
So let's walk through the capitalization table of this partnership. Who is bringing what to the deal?
So the human brings the labor.
Yeah.
You bring the sweat equity, the time, the late nights, the strategic planning. That is your undeniable contribution.
Makes sense.
But the senior partner, God, brings what the texts call the foundational resources.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning everything you didn't physically create out of thin air. The land you are standing on, the water that irrigates your crops, the solar energy from the sun, the raw minerals in the ground.
Free capital.
Right? The texts literally call it free capital. It's capital that absolutely no human labored to create. It was provided gratis by the universe.
That's really interesting because usually in modern economics, we treat natural resources as something we just own once we buy the deed to the land.
Capitalism says, if I buy it, it's mine.
If I buy a plot of land, I own the dirt, I own the water rights, I own the air above it.
But this framework says, no, you didn't make the land. You're just occupying it. You're managing it. And it actually goes way deeper than just dirt and water.
How so?
The sources argue that even human intelligence, your capacity to think, to code, to invent, to manage a team, is also a capital investment from the senior partner.
Wow, that is a very humbling shift.
It really is.
It's basically saying my brain isn't strictly mine, it's company equipment.
Precisely. Think about it for a second. Did you design your own neurons? Did you engineer the electrical impulses that are allowing you to have this conversation with me right now?
No, obviously not.
No. That was a gift. It was an initial investment placed inside you so you could function.
So if I use my brain to invent a new app, or I use the land to grow 1,000 acres of wheat, I am essentially mixing my labor with the senior partner's capital.
Correct. And this is where the texts bring in a very specific archetype to critique the whole capitalist mindset. They tell the story of...
Quarren, I saw that in the notes. This is a historical figure mentioned in the text, right?
Yes. In the Quranic narrative, Qarun is the ultimate tycoon. He is the Jeff Bezos or the Elon Musk of his time, but with a very specific problematic attitude.
Which was?
Well, he was immensely wealthy. And when he was asked about his fortune, basically when society asked him to give back or pay his fair share, his response was just the absolute definition of arrogance.
What did he say?
He essentially said, I acquired this wealth strictly through my own knowledge and my own exceptional skills.
Classic self-made billionaire defense. I pulled myself up by my bootstraps.
Exactly. I earned this, nobody helped me. And the text's rebuttal to Quarren is incredibly sharp. It argues that his claim is factually false.
Because of the free capital.
Right, because the very intellect he used to earn that money was a gift. He didn't create the laws of physics that he exploited to build his empire. So by claiming he did it all himself, he is effectively in senior partner's.
Embezzling credit. I like that phrasing. He's claiming 100% of the credit for a project where he realistically only provided 50% of the input.
Exactly. And this leads us right into the distribution of profit. If we actually accept this joint venture model, God puts up the raw materials and the brains, I put up the physical work, then logically the partner gets a cut of the profits.
That's just basic business logic. The investor gets a return on their capital.
Correct. That is the basis of the economic flow in this entire system. Since God is the provider of the resources, he demands a share of the surplus wealth.
And here's the design twist that changes the whole game. God doesn't have a bank account.
Right.
He doesn't need the money. He's the creator. He has absolutely no use for currency.
So where does the dividend go? If the senior partner doesn't want the cash, who gets the payout? The sources are explicit here. The senior partner's share is designated for the disadvantaged, the poor, the needy, the stalled sectors of society.
To people who are struggling.
Yes. Those who physically cannot work, or those who have just been left behind by circumstances.
This completely reframes the entire idea of what surplus actually is.
It does. In this system, surplus wealth isn't your private property. It is described as a divine trust, or
Manat.
yes. If you have surplus, meaning you have wealth well beyond your own daily needs, and there are people in your society who are in need, that extra money in your pocket isn't yours anymore.
It legally belongs to them via the partnership agreement.
Exactly.
That is intense, because if I keep it, I'm not just being stingy or not charitable. I'm literally a thief.
You are holding on to funds that rightfully belong to the partner's designated beneficiaries. It completely stops being about benevolence, like, oh, look how nice I'm giving to charity, and it starts being about strict contractual obligation.
It changes the power dynamic entirely. In our world, philanthropy is a massive status symbol. I wrote a big check, I put my name on a hospital wing, I'm a hero. But in this system, you aren't doing the poor a favor at all.
No. You are just delivering what is rightfully theirs.
You are essentially a delivery driver for the senior partner.
I love that analogy. You don't get a medal for delivering a package that the customer already paid for.
Exactly.
And this foundational concept of protecting the labor and acknowledging the resources leads us directly into what I think is the most controversial and definitely most misunderstood topic in Islamic finance.
You're talking about
Riba.
this is almost always translated simply as interest, right?
Yes, standard financial interest.
And usually we think of interest in very black and white terms. If I go to a bank for a mortgage to buy a house, I pay interest. If I swipe a credit card, I pay
It's
interest.
the water we swim in.
We just view that as the unavoidable cost of doing business. But the sources we have today seem to view it as well.
A crime is putting it very mildly. The text literally calls it a war against God and his messenger.
War.
Yes. It is the absolute harshest language used in the entire book regarding any social or economic crime.
But why? What is so inherently evil about charging, say, 4% on a business loan? It seems like a totally standard financial transaction.
The commentary by Alama Parwez really breaks this down beautifully. He argues that we have to move way beyond the simple financial mechanic of percentage points.
So what is the philosophical definition?
The sources fundamentally define riba not just as interest on a loan, but as the wrongful seizure and exploitation of another person's hard labor.
You're going to have to connect the dots for me there. How is lending money seizing someone's labor?
Let's look at a hypothetical scenario to make this really concrete. Suppose I have capital, accumulated money. Maybe I inherited a lump sum, or maybe I saved it up over years.
You're the rich guy.
I'm sitting on cash. You, on the other hand, have a need. Maybe you need to feed your family, or maybe you have a brilliant idea for a bakery, but you have zero money to actually buy the commercial oven.
So I'm the one with the drive, the willingness to work, and the need. You're the one with the cash pile.
Right. So I say, sure, I'll lend you the capital. You take that money, you go buy the flour, you buy the oven, and you get to work. You're up at 4 a.m. You're kneading the dough. You're sweating in front of a hot oven. You are stressing over getting customers through the door. You are the one actively creating value in the world through your physical and mental effort.
Right. I'm doing all the actual heavy lifting here.
But when it's time to pay me back, I demand the principal, the original amount I gave you, plus an extra amount, the interest.
Standard.
But the question the source asks is, what does that extra amount actually represent?
Well, in modern terms, a banker would say it represents the risk I took by lending it to you, or the time value of that money.
Sure. But in the highly labor-centric logic of this text, that extra money represents a chunk of the wealth that you created with your sweat. I, the lender, did zero work to generate that extra value. I just sat on my pile of gold and waited. I essentially let the clock do the work for me.
So basically, because I have money and you don't, I have the leverage to reach right into your pocket and take a slice of your hourly wage in.
Exactly. It is entirely decoupling reward from effort.
That makes sense.
The core principle of this divine jurisprudence is full and fair compensation. The text insists that a human being is entitled to the full fruit of their labor.
And Reba violates that.
Riba violates that because it allows the owner of capital to siphon off the worker's food without contributing any actual labor of their own.
It's a very labor-centric theory of value. It's almost saying that money itself is totally sterile. It can't breed more money.
Right.
Only human beings can actually create value.
That is a perfect way to put it. Money cannot beget money. Only effort begets value. If I demand a return just because I hold the capital, I am essentially taxing your existence.
And if we connect this back to the joint venture we talked about earlier.
It becomes even clearer. God provided the resources, the free capital for everyone to thrive.
Right.
If I use my hoarded pile of resources to trap you in debt and extract your labor, I am flagrantly violating the partnership agreement. I am using the company equipment to oppress the other employee.
No wonder the sources call this the biggest crime in the Quranic court.
Yes, because it creates a massive systemic imbalance. It creates an entire class of people who earn without ever working, and a class of people who work constantly but don't get to keep their own earnings.
That is the literal definition of exploitation in this framework.
Absolutely.
So you have this incredibly high-level philosophy. No exploitation. Wealth is a trust. God is the senior partner. But what I love about these sources, and this is where it gets really surprising for a religious text, is that they don't just stay up in the philosophical clouds.
No, they get their hands dirty.
They get right down into the mud of daily administration. We need to talk about the longest verse.
Yes. Surah al-Baqarah, verse 282.
It is iconic for a really weird reason. You'd think the longest single verse in a holy book would be about the nature of the human soul,
Or the afterlife.
or how to pray, or some grand metaphysical truth about the universe. But it isn't.
No.
It is entirely about paperwork.
It is literally a detailed administrative memo on how to write a debt contract.
It's fascinating.
And the experts we're citing argue there is a profound reason for this. This isn't just bureaucracy for the sake of selling more filing cabinets. It is entirely about preserving mutual trust in society.
The text uses the concept of avoiding facade, right?
Yes, facade. That translates to chaos, corruption, or societal imbalance. A society that is constantly fighting over money is a society in chaos. A society where people can casually deny their debts or trick naive lenders is a broken society.
So the text lays out a really strict protocol to prevent that chaos.
Oh, exactly.
So let's look at the rules. Rule number 1, mandatory writing.
Explicit. When you contract a debt for a specified term, it must be written down. Period. It is not a suggestion. It is a divine command. No gentleman's agreements. No, hey, I'll pay you back next month. Just trust me.
Because memory is fickle.
Memory fades. Change. Friendships turn sour. The text fully acknowledges human fallibility. Writing it down makes the truth objective.
And then we have the rule about the scribe. The text says a neutral third party must physically write it down.
Right.
But there is a little clause here that I found really compelling regarding what we would call civic duty.
Yes. The verse says a scribe must not refuse to write if they are asked.
Think about that. That is effectively a tax on your literacy.
It really is. You have to remember the historical context here. 7th century Arabia. Literacy was incredibly rare.
It was superpower.
It is a massive form of wealth. If you could read and write, you held a huge advantage over the common person.
You could easily exploit people who couldn't read the contracts they were making.
Exactly. But the text completely flips it. It argues that because God gave you this gift of literacy, this free capital of the mind, you're obligated to serve the community with it.
You owe society.
You cannot hoard your ability to read and write any more than you can hoard your gold. You must be available to facilitate justice.
So the scribe sits down to write the contract. Who actually does the talking? The text makes a really big deal about the dictation of the terms.
This is a crucial nuance that is designed entirely to protect the vulnerable. The text commands that the debtor, must dictate the terms of the document.
Why the borrower? Because usually in our world, the bank drafts the 50-page contract, slides it across the table, and says, sign here or get out.
It flips the power dynamic completely. By having the debtor speak the words out loud, I owe this much, to be paid on this exact date, they are taking psychological and legal ownership of the obligation.
They are actively defining their own debt.
Exactly.
It empowers them, and simultaneously, it traps them in the truth.
Yes.
Because if they dictate it themselves, they can never come back later and say, oh, the wealthy lender tricked me and wrote down the wrong number.
They spoke it themselves in front of witnesses. It forces absolute transparency.
But what if they can't? The text mentions exceptions. If the debtor is feeble-minded or wet, or maybe they just don't understand the language or the complex math of the deal.
In that case, their guardian or agent must dictate with strict justice. The system simply refuses to leave a loophole where someone can be exploited just because they aren't financially savvy.
Then come the witnesses, and this leads to a clause that feels so incredibly modern to me. The text explicitly states that neither scribes nor witnesses can be harassed or harmed.
This is effectively a whistleblower protection act and a judicial safety clause, codified centuries ago. The sources note that in corrupt systems throughout history, how do you win a lawsuit?
You intimidate the people testifying against you.
Exactly. You threaten the witness, break the scribe's fingers. You tell them, don't show up to court tomorrow or conveniently lose that piece of paper.
Mob tactics. Pure intimidation.
The Quranic framework fully anticipates this ugly reality. It makes the safety of the legal functionaries a divine command. If you harm the scribe or the witness, you are not just committing physical assault.
You're attacking the justice system itself.
You are attacking the divine law.
It really emphasizes that justice is a community effort. You need the scribe, the debtor, the lender, and the entire community actively protecting all of them.
It's a web of accountability.
But is it rigidly bureaucratic? Because business moves fast. If I go to the corner store to buy a loaf of bread, do I need to go find a scribe and 2 witnesses?
No, thankfully not. That is the highly practical side of the law. The sources point out exceptions. If it is an on-the-spot daily trade, hand over the cash, get the goods, no writing needed.
That would just grind the economy to a complete halt.
It would be impossible. The strict bureaucracy is specifically for debt involving a future time frame.
And there is an exception for travel, right?
Yes. If you are on a journey and you simply can't find a scribe anywhere, the text allows for physical collateral, a pledge in hand to secure the debt.
So the ultimate goal is always the security of the transaction, but the method adapts to the physical situation. It's pragmatic.
Very pragmatic.
So we have established that this is a system that violently hates exploitation and loves perfectly clear contracts. But this discussion of witnesses brings us to the absolute elephant in the
I
room,
knew we were getting here.
the part of the text that gets the most heat from modern critics.
The issue of female witnesses.
Right. The verse specifically mentions that if two men aren't available to witness the contract, you should get one man and two women. And let's be totally honest, historically, critics have seized on this verse. They say, look, the math is crystal clear here. One man equals two women. Therefore, a woman is worth exactly half a man.
Or they say women are deemed intellectually inferior in this system.
Right. That's the standard critique. And if you read the verse totally in isolation, without any context, you can easily see why people land there.
Of course.
But the deep dive material we have today, specifically Parwez's analysis of the second creation and the historical context, takes a completely different approach.
It does. It argues that if you read this as a permanent biological statement about female intellect, you are completely missing the point.
So help us see the point. What is the context we're missing when we just read the translation?
We have to look at the harsh historical reality of the society this text was originally addressing. Pre-Islamic Arabia was not a great place to be a woman.
To put it mildly.
It was a society where women were treated, quite literally, as chattels, as property to be inherited.
The sources even mention the practice of burying newborn daughters alive.
Yes, female infanticide was a horrifying accepted practice. But even beyond that extreme, women were denied all access to education.
Right.
They were completely alienated from public, financial, and legal affairs. A woman in that era lived in a tightly controlled bubble. She was kept as a doll, as the text explicitly describes it.
So she wouldn't know a loan contract from a grocery list because she was never legally allowed to see one.
Exactly. She had zero exposure to the marketplace. So I want you to imagine taking anyone, male or female, who has been systematically excluded from the world of money, who is terrified of the male-dominated public space, and suddenly throwing them to a high-stakes court case to testify on a complex financial dispute.
They would be terrified. They wouldn't know what to do.
They would be completely overwhelmed. The text describes this psychological state as being effectively mute, not physically mute, but socially silenced.
The pressure of the patriarchal society would just crush them.
It would make it nearly impossible for her to speak up confidently against a powerful, wealthy man in court.
So the requirement for two women, where the text says one reminds the other, wasn't because her brain was deficient.
No.
It was a support system.
Precisely. It was a transitional measure. It was a built-in support system to give her the psychological confidence to speak in an incredibly hostile environment.
It was a crutch for a broken leg.
That is the perfect metaphor. And this is the absolute critical part the text does not say, keep the leg broken forever.
Right. And this is where the concept of the second creation comes in. This was honestly the most fascinating part of the reading for me.
Insha-i-sani, the second creation.
Break that down for us.
The sources argue that the Quranic framework mandates a rigorous, uncompromising program of education and training for women. The goal of this legal system is not to keep women as sheltered dolls.
The goal is to fix the broken leg.
The goal is to take that mute, marginalized woman and completely rebuild her standing in society.
To transform her into something else.
Yes. The text uses the specific term fasil bayan.
Fasil bayan.
It implies someone who is highly articulate, eloquent, and fully capable of self-advocacy. The objective of the state is to turn the woman who is afraid to speak into an eloquent advocate who probably understands the law better than the men in the room.
So here is the million-dollar question then. Once that transformation actually happens, once the second creation is achieved through education, what happens to the two-women rule?
The sources we're reviewing are very clear on this. The rule is strictly a function of the social condition. When the condition changes, the rule changes. Once the woman is educated and empowered, the transitional need for a second witness completely evaporates.
That completely flips the narrative I've always heard. It suggests the law essentially implies its own expiration date.
Precisely. An empowered, educated woman stands as her own complete, independent witness in a court of law.
She doesn't need a chaperone anymore.
She doesn't need a chaperone because she isn't intimidated anymore.
Right.
She stands entirely on her own intellectual merit.
So the law is actually pushing society aggressively away from the need for the rule.
Exactly. It is a roadmap out of patriarchy. It is not a reinforcement of it.
And the sources go even further than just court witnesses. They don't just say she can testify. They talk about the absolute highest ceiling of leadership.
They do. And this logic is derived from the principle of shared essence.
Right.
The texts heavily emphasize that men and women are created from the exact same clay. There is no spiritual, intellectual, or physical superiority in their fundamental essence.
Absolute equality at the genetic level, basically.
Absolute equality. Therefore, the sources conclude that an empowered woman, one who has gone through this educational second creation, is fully qualified for the highest positions of public leadership.
How high are we talking? Give us the ceiling.
The text specifically mentions
Takmilat Kisarpa.
that translates directly to
The
the
head of state, the president, the prime minister. So, totally contrary to this stereotype that this is a system trying to keep women barefoot and in the kitchen, these sources are arguing that the divine framework actively prepares them to run the entire government.
Yes. The theological argument is, if the divine law demands their rigorous education, and if their core essence is entirely equal to men, then arbitrarily barring them from top leadership would be a direct violation of the divine plan.
The mute witness was just the symptom of a sick society.
And the female head of state is the natural result of the healed, fully realized Quranic society.
It is a complete roadmap for empowerment. It suggests that the law has a trajectory, and that trajectory is always moving towards full human capability.
And it fits perfectly with the economic side we discussed earlier. Just as the system desperately wants to free the laborer from economic exploitation by banning riba, it wants to free women from social degradation.
It's all about removing barriers to human potential.
Exactly. It is highly consistent.
So let's zoom out a bit. We have built this massive interconnected structure over the last hour.
We've covered a lot.
We have the joint venture economy that fundamentally prevents hoarding. We have the strict anti-exploitation laws regarding interest. We have the meticulous bureaucracy that protects the vulnerable in debt contracts. And we have a social education system that aims to transform marginalized women into national leaders.
It is a highly sophisticated, holistic ecosystem.
But there is one final layer we have to discuss because, frankly, you can write all the laws you want. You can ban interest. You can mandate third-party scribes. You can build 1,000 schools.
Right.
But what actually stops people from cheating when the police aren't looking?
That is the final piece of the puzzle, the outro of our deep dive today.
Moral accountability.
Yes. The sources uniquely tie all these administrative threads together under the core concept of iman, or inner moral consciousness.
The expert commentary pointed out something really profound about that long debt verse again. It says, essentially, if you are on a journey and you can't find a scribe, use collateral. But if you truly trust each other, then let the one who is trusted discharge his trust faithfully.
Right. It explicitly leaves room for the handshake deal.
But it wraps that handshake deal in a terrifying level of personal responsibility. It says, let him fear God, his Lord. This is what they call the unwritten trust.
It is saying that even if there is zero paper trail, even if there are no physical witnesses around, and even if absolutely no court on earth can ever convict you, you are still fully accountable.
That is the third option difference right there. Capitalism entirely relies on the free market regulating itself, which we know often fails because markets don't inherently have a moral conscience.
And communism relies entirely on the state forcing compliance, which fails because the state simply can't be everywhere at once.
This system relies on the individual's burning consciousness that they are in an active, breathing partnership with the divine.
You can hide a shady transaction from the IRS. You can hide it from your human business partner. But you literally cannot hide it from the senior partner who provided the capital in the first place.
Precisely. And that belief structure fundamentally changes how you behave in the dark when no one is watching. The purpose of the law, according to these texts, isn't just to restrict the human self to say, don't do this, don't do that, just to be endlessly controlling.
No, the stated purpose is to
Expand and elevate. I really like that phrasing. It sounds a bit counterintuitive for a strict legal code, though.
think of it like the rules of the road. They restrict you from driving on the sidewalk. They restrict you from driving 100 miles per hour in a busy school zone.
Right.
But by mutually accepting those strict restrictions, you actually expand your ability to travel safely across the country. You expand the freedom of the entire community to move without fear.
That is a phenomenal analogy. By restricting economic exploitation, you expand social justice.
Yes.
By restricting wealth hoarding, you expand prosperity for the community. By restricting the oppression of women, you expand the intellectual capital of the entire nation.
Exactly. It connects the literal money in your pocket to the ink on a legal contract, to the rigorous education of your daughter, and finally right down to the quiet conscience in your own heart.
It's all one cohesive thing. We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We have redefined interest as the outright theft of human labor. We have turned mundane bureaucracy into a sacred civic duty. And we have seen how education can entirely rewrite the legal status of women.
It is definitely a lot to digest for one sitting.
It is. But if there's one single thing I want you, the listener, to walk away with, it is this core idea of the joint venture. I think it changes absolutely everything about how we view our monthly paychecks.
It forces a certain level of deep humility. It really kills the ego.
Right, it kills the Karun mindset. And that leads me directly to the final thought I want to leave everyone with today. It is a question derived purely from the logic we have just explored.
Go on, lay it on us.
If we accept the premise, just entertain it for a moment, that our intellect, our natural talents, the very neurons firing in our brains right now, if we accept that those are free gifts from a higher power, free capital seamlessly invested into us, then how does that fundamentally change the way we view the paycheck we so proudly think we earned entirely on our own?
That is the ultimate question.
Are we truly self-made? Or are we just temporarily managing a massive trust fund that we didn't actually create?
That is the question that completely dismantles the Karun mindset we started with.
Something heavy to mull over the next time you log in to check your bank account balance. That is it for this deep dive into divine jurisprudence.
It's been an absolute pleasure exploring this framework with you all.
We will catch you on the next one. Keep thinking.